Hello, beautiful people. My name is Kristen. Thank you for stopping by my channel in this fantastic month of October. And it's when the weather kind of turns, and of course, there's Halloween. So there's just something really enticing about reading books that are that little bit spooky or haunted or themed. And I can't remember if it was last October, which I'm pretty sure it may have been the October previous, that my coffee and a classic. I'm drinking the coffee, and I think this was actually sent in October of last year, and I'm just now getting to it. But to be fair, when I was in my 20s in college, I had a complete works of Edgar Allan Poe, and my goal was to read all of it. It had all the poems, all the stories, all the short novels, everything. And I did read it all. And I remember really, really liking it. But I haven't read it. That was like 30 years ago, right? So it's interesting to reread, not only in the month of October, but in different stages of our life, right? So I have a few thoughts and reflections to pass on and maybe encourage you if you are looking, because you can actually technically just read one of his short stories or just a poem or two and be totally hip on reading a classic and Poe in the month of October. It's an easy thing. So this is a beautiful copy. It's got just the beautiful pages and the faux leather binding. It has several short stories in it, and it does not have any of his poems. So I remember like thinking to myself that I would never reread the complete works, and I gave away that book, and that's one of the books I regret giving away. So I will have to someday get a copy of his poems. But there are a couple stories in here that I think there's a lot out there on his really classics, the Murder in the Rue Morgue and the Telltale Heart and the Purloined Letter and the Pit and the Pendulum. And I remembered all those, right? I remember, even though it's been 30 years, I remembered the stories, and I remembered kind of how they turn out or what happens, so because they were memorable and good. But there were a couple in here that I do not remember reading, and I think in part I'll tell you why. So there was one called Metzengerstein, and then there was one called A Descent into the Maelstrom. And both of those were basically stories about sailors and boats and sea journeys and storms and sea adventures. And the way it read, and especially even the way that it kind of ends, I just really felt like I was reading kind of an extension or part of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And that is one of my all-time favorite classic books by Jules Verne. And so I stopped after reading the first short story and started Googling when Poe had written this and when Jules Verne, and it turns out that yes, they are actually, in fact, somewhat officially even connected, because Jules Verne came after Poe and was very clear in talking about how he was inspired by Poe and really loved Poe. And you can totally, now that I've read several Jules Verne and reread Poe, I can totally appreciate that. And it's really neat seeing how authors do inspire one another, right? That's one of the main reasons I love kind of delving into the classics, is that then it gives you a richer kind of flavor or understanding into some of the more modern books. And I like a lot of those adaptions or retellings, but even more than a retelling, the more subtle things that are kind of presented. And also just reading the intro section about Poe's life, I had forgotten that he was born in Boston, and I knew that he had been orphaned at a rather young age, but I'd forgotten the circumstances. His mom passing of tuberculosis when he was super young, and losing his dad really quickly as well. And then he was adopted by the Allans, who struggled with a lot of his struggles. Like, they did not, I think, were not able at that point in time or history to get him the help or to recognize some of the maybe needs that he had to deal with some of his angst. And he got very involved in the wrong crowds, and particularly alcoholism. And the only one who kind of showed him some kind of family love and acceptance was an aunt of the Poe family, who he then kind of fell in love with his cousin and married her, and then she passed. And so his life is just filled with tragedy. But we get to kind of benefit from his writing of angst and darkness and so many themes of death. And what I love is, if you know anything about me and my reading habits, I don't like horror. I do like thriller and suspense. And Poe actually does a brilliant job of talking about things that are very psychologically thrilling, even to the point of there's some violence and some gore, but it's done in a way that I have no problems with. I think that this is just masterful writing, beautiful, intense language, so smart. I just hurt for him as a person and wish that he had had a lot more happiness and redemption and blessing in his life while he lived. And I hope that my belief is that, you know, when we pass on to our new spiritual lives, that we do know, in fact, the blessing that we were on this planet. So that is my reflections, my encouragement, my sharing, my revisiting of Poe. I encourage you during this spooky month of October for coffee and a classic. Just pick up some Poe. Just see, I know there are several, this was not his complete short stories, because there was a couple that were mentioned in the introduction that aren't in the book. So I very much will look forward to continuing to revisiting Poe and learning more. If you have a favorite one, I would love for you to drop it in the comments below for everybody to see. And I hope that you just have happy reading, whatever you are picking up. Take care. Happy October. Happy reading, y'all.